Welcome back, everyone. Hello. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Feeling energized? No? No? Are you sure no? Okay, let me get you guys a bit more energetic. Can you guys follow me? All right. Okay, follow me. Oh, eh, oh. Follow me. Oh, eh, oh. La, 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 eh, la, la, la. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh. Macam lembek je. One more time, okay? Oh, eh, oh. La, 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 eh, la, la, la. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh. All right, thank you, everyone. All right, we now move on to a highly anticipated and competitive segment of the ASEAN Youth Summit, the Youth Debate. To kick off, please ensure your mobile devices are set to silent mode. We now officially begin the Youth Debate, the Great Sustainability. This debate will focus on the motion, this House would support a regional carbon border adjustment mechanism in ASEAN to align with global sustainability standards. Let's welcome our debate teams and chairperson to the front. It's my pleasure to invite Ms. Qarirah Hasnizul from the MIDP Youth Institute to conduct the debate session. Over to you.
Thank you, MC. Good afternoon. My name is Qarirah Hasnizul from MIDP Youth Institute, and I will be your chair for today's youth debate, the Great Sustainability Debate. On the motion, this House would support a regional carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, in ASEAN to align with global sustainability standards. I hereby call this House to order. On the government bench, we have Hezron Kowardi from Indonesia as the Prime Minister. On the opposition bench, we have Jason Keng from Malaysia as leader of opposition. Next, we have Sansabila Benyakash from Thailand as the Deputy Prime Minister. Next, we have Rivaldo Aquino from the Philippines as the Deputy Leader of Opposition. The government whip is Siti Aisyah binti Saiful from Malaysia. And the opposition whip is Nguyen Thi Phong An from Vietnam. Doing the reply speech for government is Hezron Kowardi. And doing the reply speech for the opposition is Jason Keng. Apologies, doing the reply speech for the opposition is Rivaldo Aquino. A few house rules before we start the debate. Please be respectful of your opponents and adhere to the rules of the debate. I will ring the bell once at the first minute to indicate point of information can be asked. Once at the 6th minute to indicate POI time is over, and twice at the 7th minute to indicate your allocated speech time is up. I will ring the bell 3 times at the 7-minute 15-second mark and keep my hands up to indicate the judges are no longer taking notes. Without further ado, I now invite the Prime Minister to deliver their speech. Hear, hear.
Check, check, am I audible? Hello, hello? Hello, hello? This. Oh, okay. Do I use this or this? Oh, so I don't use it? Okay. That's that. Oh, all right. My papers. Yeah, here. Okay. Test, am I audible? Yep. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I watch Wicked for Good. Wait. There's an echo.
Can we please change the mic?
Hello, hello.
Test.
Re-invite you.
Yep.
All right,
Hello.
apologies for the technical difficulties. Let's restart again. Without further ado, I now invite the Prime Minister to deliver their speech. Hear, hear.
Yep. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I watched Wicked for Good last night, and I couldn't laugh it any better. You might wonder why I'm telling you this right now, but let me bring you inside my mind. In the movie, I could see how things will fall apart for our planet when we fail to take actions as a society. How miserable we turn to be when the wickedness of the powerful falls into the inability of society to breathe and live. Carbon is not wicked. The people behind it are the ones who are wicked. Those are the people that we need to try to stop and limit. But it wouldn't be changed if it's just one person trying. It takes everyone to do everything they could. This applies the same with our debate today. We don't only need EU and the West to help us, our climate and our Earth. It needs ASEAN as a whole. It needs not all of us, but all of us, and it needs you. And let's start with CBAM from today's debate. I will talk about 2 things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why it will bring us a lot of economical benefit in the end. And secondly, I'm going to talk about the environmental benefits and the harms that we will able to go against in this debate. But before that, I want this to be a clean debate, so let me start with 3 points of setups. And it's gonna take long, bear with me. So firstly, how does CBAM originally work in the EU, right? It's a system made to regulate the ETS, or like the European trading system, when in simple word, it looks like 2 things. One, if you want to pass the limit of like the carbon that you produce, or like you pass the regional emission benchmark, then you need to pay some degree of money for the certificates for you to have to pass those products to be sold in the EU citizens. And it takes about like 10 to like 100 euro per ton in 2026, and right now it also ranges around the same range. Secondly, if there are a lot of other states that wants to export their products to EU, they also have to pay what is named as like, CBAM certificates. They have to pay like certain amount of money as well for them to be able to get it sold in the EU. This means that currently the system is already being evaluated by the EU with non-stop evaluation, that they want to listen to everything that everyone thinks of. This is something that we can also apply in ASEAN. But the status quo in ASEAN right now is that carbon pricing schemes are still very narrow in a way that a lot of countries are still very weak on that one. That's why we want to apply this motion. Second setup, how does the regional adaptation will look like then? It's going to look like four things. Number one, we're not going to promise you that it's going to be like 100% the same, right? Maybe it's only like 51% the same later, or like 80% the same. But it's something that we are willing to take off in so far that we can adapt this in the long run. And we don't want to hear anything from negative team trying to say that it's going to be in rough, it's not the right momentum, because on this part, we don't need to do it by like 5 months or like 1 year, right? We can take as much time as possible. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years, in so far that we do it right now. Secondly, I am ready for any harm from negative, talking about why currently the politics are unstable. Maybe there are some backlashes from like the countries in ASEAN. Note to you, everyone, that the backlashes that might happen from the society or the member states are also the same discussion that would occur in public forums, that would occur in the conference of like COP26 or like 27 or like any conferences about youth and also like the carbon emissions stuff. So it means that those kind of things can also be gathered under our side when they can discuss about any problems that they want to mention in negative team. But the third thing is also regarding on how maybe they will also say that it's going to take a very hard capital and it's not an easy money for these regional states. Note to you that we're not starting from zero, right? We see that countries like Singapore is already very great in their own regional carbon trading system, and the way that other countries like Malaysia has already started on like, green hydropower, or like even in Indo, we do a lot of policies to incentivize electric cars. This means that we're not starting from zero, it's something that we can do. But lastly, just as a preemption, if you want to say that there's going to be like a lot of power imbalance within Singapore and the other developing states, this is something that has been very normal. We believe that in ASEAN, if we want to do this, then we need to rely to Singapore to also trickle down some power to the member states. So it's something that we can perfectly do in this debate. Before I go on to the third setup, yes?
You can't just say we'll do CBAM in 20 years. We'll clearly fail our 2050 targets if you do that. You need to give us a specific and soon enough time to implement this for us to debate the motion.
Yep, if there is the problem, there are two responses to that. Number one, in this debate, they should also have the burden to tell you at what time they need to do this. Because we told you already from the urgency, there is something we need to do now or later. So they also need to give a specific time frame on when is the right time for that. But secondly, I think it's just impossible for us to debate on this motion or giving like a specific time. It is not me not being able to give you what I need to serve. This is just something that we cannot predict insofar that we're not in the house of those representatives from like the ASEAN states. But even I have to give a number, I think that 10 years or like 20 years are still doable. I cannot give you a specific time frame on that one. But the last thing that I will mention on the setup, they will also have something to do with the POI from brief is simple. I know that doubt is normal, that now you have doubt on whether or not it's feasible or whether or not we can do this. But two things as preemption on that. Number one, in every policy, the normal reaction of a human being is that we doubt the policy to exist, right? We doubt when will it happen. We wonder, is it within 10 years or like 50 years, right? But doubt is something you need to beat off insofar that you want a change. But secondly, this is also where we enter the debate clearly. Because what we're trying to say from the very beginning is that doubt is not something that should make you not do something, but insofar that we can tell you the benefits are able to outweigh anything that you have in your mind right now. Even if you're only 51% sure about this policy, that means that you're still supporting the motion, because the motion says that this House would support this to begin with. So I think the setup clears a lot of things in this debate. Now I will move on to the arguments. Firstly, on how do we get more bargaining and trading power in this debate. Three layers under this one. Number one, I think it's just by the simple fact that a lot of us in ASEAN, like Malaysia, we export things like electricals and metals, and like Vietnam, we get like steel and cement and like any other stuff in that regard. This means that insofar that we want to have like the same or like increase in bargaining power when we want to trade to like the EU or like any countries in the West, we need this to happen. We need to have the same bargaining power that those EU states are able to have that competitive market for us to be able to compete there. But secondly, it also means that if we do not do this, we're gonna be a hole for like, a lot of cheap goods, right? Because we're gonna be the one that doesn't have any policy on that one. But simple on environment, if we wanna do this, the countries in ASEAN will also incentivize those companies inside of the countries to also police this kind of policies to be able to enter CBAM. This means that we also create a regional development in the end of the day as a trickle-down effect of all this. I've never been prouder to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the wonderful speech. With that, I invite the Leader of Opposition to open the case for the opposition bench. Hear, hear.
Testing. All right. Okay. Before I start, I want to give a couple of shout-outs to my friends from USM and Uniten, and I lost my grandmother in end of April, so I hope you're seeing from heaven. Opposition bench has never go against CBAM. We think that it's a good idea, but when you do something that is akin to a blanket policy, it's going to harm all the countries in ASEAN. Proud to oppose. I think one thing that we have to address in this debate is, number one, Gov must first take a hard stance. It's not about talking about time periods where we can progress it slowly. The world moves at a very rapid pace, at the point of which you tell them that, oh, we are going to do it in a stipulated period of time that is longer than expected, I think is as good as doing nothing. What we are telling is not about time. We instead say that status quo within government bench is definitely lacking in terms of one key framing, which is ASEAN is not the European Union. We are not as developed as them. We need time. Of course we need time. But of course you cannot put a blanket policy to do this. And hence, we are going to tell one simple thing. Our burden of proof is simple. We're going to say why this regional CBAM in ASEAN is going to bring more harm than good. And then we are going to just posit our mechanization. Instead of a CBAM, we are going to just say, just let all the ASEAN countries have their own regulation. Let us all have our own carbon tax regulation. Why is it so? Because one, you are able to tailor it to the own local economy circumstances. If your country needs more money in education, you can slow it down. You don't need to force countries like Myanmar to have to put all their resources into carbon taxing when in reality they need it for public infrastructure, for example. Number two, you also have the ability for governments to tailor this incentive to ensure that more FDIs are going to flow into your country. And number three, help your local companies to adapt with better pace. Even if they don't think that this mechanism is suitable, we say we just need to use the bare basic benefits within ASEAN to boost the inter-ASEAN ties and trade for the purpose. I'm going to go to 2 points on, first on the harm first. I think imposition of a blanket policy is going to be harmful to the smaller industry players, right? What are the status quo that was not in this debate? First of all, there are two forms of competitions within ASEAN already. One, which is inter-ASEAN competition, which means that within the countries within ASEAN, you already have GDP and investment disparity that curtails the policy effectiveness to begin with. And second of all, intra-nation competition, which means the big companies within Malaysia is competing against the SMEs, meaning to say the SMEs will never be able to outperform them in any circumstances of the world. Meaning to say they will lose out at any point because they lack liquidity, especially if they are very import dependent. Either way, small companies are going to lose its competitiveness because of this factor and the fact that they need to depend on loans, especially when you need to now have to charge more, especially when you need to buy things from overseas. This CBAM will add more burden to it. Means that smaller SMEs in any countries in general means that you have to pay more costs, but the productivity remains the same. What happens means you're going to have much more higher of a burden because of these blanket policies that affect everybody. How is it then bad? The impact is simple. The circumstances of it already occur in status quo, even without CBAM. You see that SMEs are having high bankruptcy rates. Lots of bailouts were done towards these companies by the large corporations, meaning to say that you are going to have a lot more of these monopolies because the big companies buying out all the small companies to begin with. Meaning to say, the effect of it is, one, you have lesser amount of competition because all the large companies just simply buy out the small players, or two, they basically just now collude with all other bigger players or the medium-sized ones to ensure that there will be lower amounts of check and balances by a competition. So we are saying that even in the circumstances that we want to propose, you are going to have to prove to me necessarily from side government, how is it going to be feasible? I'll take one.
I know that we're not EU, but if we keep telling that it's a burden for the smaller companies and we're going to compete, then how would you move as ASEAN?
Well, we do give a counter mechanism. We talk about giving the rights to have your own carbon tax competition. And I'm going to the principal argument as to why is it true. Opposition's mechanism is still good on several reasons. Number one, you have the incentive as the government to support your local SMEs in increasing your capacity building and productivity. Because note that as well, status quo is about ASEAN. ASEAN is propped up by SME in this economy. So when the SMEs fail, the country fail. That is one thing that Gov would not want to admit. Now go on to the principal argument, right? I think one thing that is important to realize is that companies competition drives positive change way better than the imposition of a blanket policy. Status quo is simple. US and China is having a trade war. Tariff war is happening. Everyone is suffering. Everyone's bleeding money. And this means that you are going to have a lot more economic divestment from China into the Southeast Asia region because we are like good market for like these developments, right? Means to say that ASEAN countries can actually vie for all these spillovers in terms of industry, FDI, regional collaborations of itself. Meaning to say, if your country has better incentive, they will be able to get these companies from China or like from other countries that want to run away from these tariff threats. Then they will be able to go to those that have higher amount of stability and higher amounts of incentive to help them grow within these borders, right? How then this blanket policy gets harmed by this? Because when you have smaller countries getting trapped in the idea of import costs increase during the CBAM, I don't think any smart companies like Intel will want to even come here. If you're just going to import all your nickel and copper from any other parts of the world and have to pay a lot of CBAM. Going to this mechanism that was proposed by opposition will be simple. We say that smaller companies also can benefit even in the circumstances that you do have no tariff. Because like, note that within ASEAN, you can trade with like regional partners and it's totally fine without tariff anyway. So how does this help then? Because you're going to have like a lot more economic dependency and stability within ASEAN. You get more investments in this form of positive feedback loop in terms of ASEAN brotherhood, whereby you have all the countries within ASEAN to be able to cooperate on a deeper level. You're then able to improve the connectivity. The impact then is simple. The ASEAN companies will also get the chance to develop in each other's states, means to say it's also capacity building to sense. Before I wrap up this speech, preemption, number one. My only preemption, actually. Gov will probably say that this is going to be some level of exodus. They're just going to go to other countries that have like better stability anyway. But remember, one, you can still get inter-ASEAN trades as nations can see potential growth within this region, right? Because this is something that is a benefit that is not exclusive to side gov to begin with. Second of all, you can also have like governments to tap into the benefit and the system to actually woo the investors, whereby in CBAM, out of your control. It is something that you cannot control because it is not a formal government policy. So let's just realize this. Because I also run out of voice already, I will just rest for side opposition.
Thank you so much for the wonderful speech. With that, I invite the Deputy Prime Minister to defend Gov's case. Here.
Okay, thank you for the honor to continue to present of the propositions. I would like to say right now, ASEAN at the defining moment, climate change is no longer distant that affect to communities, economy, and our daily life. The ASEAN report estimates that climate change disaster costs up $86.5 billion USD every year. So no single country can handle this alone. Original cooperation is necessary. This is not optional. Um, as my Prime Minister say, like, the mention about our ASEAN strength. So do you see our diversity is not a weakness, it's an opportunity. And this is why regional CBAM make sense. It's harmonize different capacity that live all the country in common, competitive standard, and without leaving anyone alone. So why ASEAN need a regional CBAM? By 2026, the EU CBAM will freely apply on steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizer, electricity, and hydrogen. This is all the major ASEAN export. So if ASEAN does not think our company face a higher cost abroad, no, the candidate support at home. In action is not the protection, it's export our industry. Original CBAM allow ASEAN to manage our own conditions rather than react our policy that made from elsewhere. And this, I would like to share the principle of the ASEAN CBAM. Our proposal follow 5 key principles. First is fairness. High emitter pay more and innovator pay less. 2 is flexibility. SME have and developed member get the phase developing member get a phase timeline, technical support, and funding. Third is transparency. Unified MRV system build trust within ASEAN and with global market. Fourth, incentive. This is a reward system, encourage cleaner production and innovations. And the last, reinvestment. All revenue goes into ASEAN Climate Finance Fund to support research, renewable university labs, and scholarship and university and SMEs upgrade. This ensures climate actions become an engine for developing rather than remissions. And this, I would like to share more about the ASEAN share the carbon credit system. At the heart of our proposal, company below benchmark earn the carbon system, a carbon credit. High emitter can buy the credit within ASEAN. SME adopt a greener technology can generate a revenue. Exporter can use ASEAN unified credit to reduce EU CBAM costs. This approach turns responsibilities into opportunities. Reducing emission become a competitive advantage, not a burden. And I think that you guys will have like the question that how ASEAN CBAM work, right? So this is very simple and clear. First, ASEAN set a regional emission benchmark. Country measure emission using unified MRV system. Company above benchmark pays, and those who below earn tradable credit. SME and developing member get a phase support, turning, and funding. Revenue go to ASEAN Climate Finance Funds. Benchmark update and technology improve a global target tied. And this creating a transparent, fair, predictable system and strength every member state. And next, the opposites talk about the SME. So I would like how SME benefit from this CBAM, original CBAM. First, lower fee is emission low. And then funding for cleaner machinery, access to ASEAN carbon credits benchmark, training MRV and energy efficiency. Stronger global competitiveness, new revenue stream, and this effort empower SME instead of burden them. In conclusions, I think do you guys like see the flooding in Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, even Vietnam right now? This is the effect from the climate change. The fact that I saw the storm and I read about, no one when this disaster to happen again. Family, school, and communities cannot bear repeat losses. ASEAN has a choice that we need to act together or be unprepared. Original CBAM supported by the shared carbon credit system and climate finance fund is a practical, fair, and achievable. By working together, ASEAN can lead resilience, innovation, and sustainability goals. The future will arrive whether we are ready or not. Let us ensure ASEAN is prepared together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister, for the speech. Now moving on to the next speaker, Deputy Leader of Opposition to defend Ops case. Hear, hear.
I dream of a world where ASEAN has a full climate transition. Clean, net zero, futuristic, like a sci-fi movie. But for all of us here to get there, this transition must be a just transition, one that leaves no stakeholders behind. The reality is that ASEAN is still largely developing and we have a long way to go. And creating a carbon border adjustment mechanism is a problem-solution mismatch, even though government's heart is in the right place. It is not suited to the unique ASEAN context. By the end of this speech, I will prove three things. The first is that CBAM will fail to mitigate climate change. Second is that it will cripple ASEAN's development. And thirdly, it will fail to protect the most climate vulnerable people that we all care about. Proud to oppose. The first thing I want to do in my speech is respond to side government. Because the reality is they have not actually proven why CBAM is the exact best mechanism to achieve the positive climate outcomes that they claim. Government argues in abstracts. They say that we need to hold emitters accountable. They say that even if you're not sure, you should do something. And they say we need to collect revenue to reinvest in climate action. We on opposition have been very clear. CBAM is not the right policy, and Jason was very clear with our alternatives. We can have regional carbon taxes, which creates that revenue generation. To add even more alternatives, we can have the emissions trading schemes that they conceded that Singapore is already starting with. We can go further by expanding a regional voluntary carbon market. We can go further with the memorandum of agreements like the one signed between Singapore and the Philippines to share carbon credits. And we can also collectively bargain for green financing packages from development banks regionally. These are all alternative solutions that don't demand the massive economic sacrifices that Jason proved to you while achieving the same benefits that government tries to claim. So, opposition, the conclusion of this is simple. Opposition acknowledges the climate emergency, but we've given you why this is not the best way to solve it. Whatever practical outcome emissions reductions that they have are very speculative, whereas on our alternatives, they're much more assured. The second thing I want to do in my speech, though, is be more charitable to side government. I will assume the best case implementation of CBAM. If they get the perfect transition timeline that they want and it's done at a regional pace, why does this still do a net harm to ASEAN? PM tried to do preemption, but this material is not preempted, so I'm going to run it anyway. The first reason why CBAM will not work for ASEAN is because of ASEAN's economic infrastructure. The only success case of CBAM they point to is the European Union and its unique infrastructure, which ASEAN simply does not have. The EU has the Eurozone, customs union, and shared monetary policy to ensure that the internal market of goods is strong and resistant to outside shocks. So, for example, if a country no longer wanted to invest in the Eurozone because of the additional CBAM prices, it's a large enough market that they would still pay for those CBAM prices. What's to say, though, that for ASEAN, which is not comparatively as big of a market, that these exporters will not just take their goods elsewhere, especially at the current point of development? Secondly, ASEAN lacks a central bank that can bail out countries that may struggle due to the effects of CBAM, the net importers I'll talk about in a second. In fact, ASEAN is largely dependent, without a central bank, on development banks like the World Bank and ADB, whose largest contributors are countries that we are now disincentivizing and alienating with a policy like a CBAM. What this proves then is that even though I love the EU and the delegation of the EU to Malaysia, the ASEAN is simply not the same as the EU in the critical regards for CBAM to work for us. The second reason why CBAM doesn't work is because of ASEAN's industry profile. Side government, I'll preempt, that they want to protect local ASEAN producers, but realize that CBAM does not apply to the industries that would benefit us. A CBAM entails that the companies inside ASEAN that want to import certain high emissions materials like steel, like cement, like fertilizers would then have to pay an additional cost to import this externally. The problem, and why this matters so much, is that nations within ASEAN are net importers. Look at Indonesia, look at Singapore, look at Philippines, Laos, Cambodia. These are all countries that do not have major producers of CBAM materials that they want to protect. They net import them. So this is simply going to backfire. But even net exporters of other products like Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam are net importers of these CBAM materials. So even though they are export-oriented economies, it is not the right products that CBAM applies to that we are intervening in now. The exception to this is Malaysia. And don't get me wrong, guys. I love Malaysia, but realize that when a regional policy comes at the expense of all of ASEAN, and it comes at the expense of businesses in Malaysia that aren't exporters of steel that are super rich, but they're importers or the ones that have to build their brick-and-mortar shops with these materials, they need to be able to import cheap materials such as this to keep the lights on and to keep their businesses running. I'll take a
All of those harms are contingent on it being 100% similar to the EU. We taught you from PM that we can have 51% even of this being similar. It's just an adaptation. So I just wonder why it has to be 100%.
So you still have to explain how it will be. The core definition of a CBAM is applying these tariffs, and it still affects in the same way. So that response does not apply to this argument. The last thing then that I've proven here is a major impact to the most vulnerable people. CBAM materials, fertilizer, steel, and cement are all extremely important materials to developing nations. It's needed to build the factories that give us jobs. It's needed to build the homes and establish the food security that the most poor people in our nations rely on. ASEAN needs these materials as cheap as possible in order to develop as quickly as possible, so create jobs, solve poverty. CBAM, by making materials more expensive, is anti-development, while we on opposition have a better shot. The last thing I'd like to do in my speech is to defend the absolute worst case of our side opposition, in which without CBAM, there is less aggressive climate mitigation. My extension is that ASEAN should not be principally obligated to take as drastic a sacrifice as a CBAM. First reason, ASEAN has very low emissions contributions compared to developed countries. This is because we are mostly developing countries, and even Singapore as a developed country is largely service-based, so not that much emissions. Any emissions that ASEAN countries have are a result of necessity, as they need to increase the basic quality of life that so many of our countrymen and citizens do not have. Any factories that we do have, any emissions from steel and fertilizers that we have, we need for the most vulnerable. That is why we are not willing to make the sacrifice, and you must oppose.
Thank you so much for the speech. Now I invite the last substantive speaker from the government bench, Government Whip, to deliver their speech. Here.
I'm going to call out the elephant in the room that none other speakers have said, which is that while we agree that ASEAN is the fastest growing region, we are also the most amount of emitters within this region. What this proves here is that the increased environmental shocks that are happening within the ASEAN region, for example, the floods that have been increasing, the amount of unprecedented earthquakes that have happened, the typhoons that have been unleashed, is actually not incidental at all. These are byproducts of us ignoring and deprioritizing climate adaptiveness. That's why in Gov, we are quite clear in saying what we're defending with CBAM is actually a pathway or a model that we can seek to stabilize climate adaptation at the end of the day. So, how am I going to approach this speech? The first is some clarifications and understanding of how CBAM works, because I see a lot of confused faces on what CBAM is, what is the scope of CBAM really is. So I'll be the person explaining that. Firstly, there is a series of items that are covered within the scope of CBAM. The first is that these are carbon-intensive products from industries like steel, aluminium, for example, and these are modeled by the EU standards, for example. So they are also considering expanding it to petrochemicals later on, possibly. But the important prerequisite here has to be that the products of CBAM are those that are carbon intensive in the first place. Secondly then, what I want to clarify here is on the second speaker's point of ASEAN being net importers, I don't think that's necessarily true. In fact, we are a huge exporter because we are so rich with raw resources that we're able to offer worldwide. People like all over the world are obsessed with the amount of aluminium that we like export in the first place, the amount of technology and knowledge that we have to offer to the broad region at the end of the day. So how does this impact the round then? The first here, the understanding of ASEAN being exporters basically proves why CBAM is necessary for us in the first place. This is because every time we want to export to regions that we like, for example, the EU, which offers a huge market of like premium like demand, for instance, these are people who are aware of like climate conscious products in the first place, then we need to adhere towards the policies that they have. But putting EU aside, there are other regional actors that we still want to appease to. ASEAN has to be competitive enough to offer products that are cheaper, but also like carbon conscious in the first place, so we are able to appeal towards a larger market. So for instance, we're able to compete with the cheaper prices that China already has in status quo, because not only are we offering the cheaper materials, but we also satisfy the standards that the EU expects us to have. And this adheres to the direction where the global stage is moving towards, which is the global like sustainability that we want to achieve as a region. First point of observation, or like how we should adhere, like how we should observe the clash. First thing, I'll take you in a bit. First thing, is CBAM a good thing for ASEAN? The answer is quite simple, yes, for a few reasons. The first here is that, I also just want to make a preemption. Their counter model is that they're going to have local domestic policies. I think this is undercutting what's already happening in the region. In fact, in ASEAN, we're making so much progress with carbon awareness. So Singapore, for instance, already has carbon taxation. Malaysia is planning to like fully adopt it by next year. Other countries like Indonesia as well has pilot projects pursuing moving towards decarbonization. So what we're trying to say here, that our case in government allows a standardization that can be applied. So it's not that we cannot have these local domestic policies and for individual member states to pursue their own local policies. In fact, we are creating a pathway to make it far easier for these countries to adapt and catch up to one another. Before I continue, yes, sure.
Climate adaptation is about building seawalls and buildings that are resilient to destruction of climate change. You need cheap steel, cheap fertilizer, everything that you're making more expensive. Catching up with the EU standards of markets is a privileged viewpoint. We need climate adaptation materials.
Yeah, so we've already explained to you how CBAM is an extension of these principles, right? It's not necessarily true, and it's unfair for opposition to call out and have like all these points, but they have no counter response, they don't have a fallback at the end of the day. They're at best maintaining status quo and what already has happened, which if we reflect, there are still countries that are being left behind. So all the claims of having inclusive environments is not true, because if that were true, then we would be on other ASEAN member states, would be on par as how Singapore is already progressing. But that's not necessarily the truth. The framework of CBAM creates the standardization for it to be easier for us to have like shared knowledge transfers, a regional bank for us to pool money towards Laos, Cambodia, for instance, to be able to progress and catch up to countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, for instance. So that's exactly how we win straight in Gulf. Continuing on and just mechanizing how this accelerates decarbonization policies and how we can have like a more added benefit in our case is that because we have all these climate funds, for instance, we are able to propel the speed of climate adaptation. So we acknowledge that climate change harms is something that is very urgent, and we have a pathway to immediately deal with it, as opposed in the world of opposition, where they acknowledge the harms, but they don't really have a solution that deals with the speed of climate change that's happening now. Last but not least, and why our case is debate winning. In the best version of opposition's case, we have status quo, which is a fragmented growth. You will have a few member states that are very carbon conscious and progressing well, but that's all there is. What happens to all the other 8, 9, 10 member states if Singapore is the only one forwarding and like being the forefront of climate change in ASEAN? I think that is the absolute like contradiction to the inclusive direction of climate change that OP is trying to defend. Last but not least here is I just want to have like a point of clarification on how exactly do we protect ASEAN exporters at the end of the day. What we have is we avoid the double taxation that we are going to like undergo through EU. I think it hasn't been contested that we still want EU at the end of the day because of the premium economy that they're able to offer. We want that market share. Therefore, we have to position ourselves in the most ideal way possible to be able to compete. This is a room of next-gen disruptors. This has to be the room where it happens. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful speech. Now I invite the last substantive speaker from the opposition bench, Opposition Whip, to deliver their speech. Here.
As the last speaker of the opposition team, I would like to clarify the government's case weakness. And before showing why regional CBAM is not the right instrument for ASEAN in this stage of development, before moving into our main argument, let me address the Gulf case. What does the Gulf believe in? They believe in a world where CBAM can have our industry to motivate. They believe in a world where CBAM can drive our region to green transition and align with global standard in sustainability. It's true, it's so perfect and aspirational. But your arguments rest on one mistake assumption that all ASEAN country can apply, can afford, and can absorb new course and adapt cleaner technology on common. I mean equally. But we all know that transition requires what? Predictable energy supply and accessible capital, stable technology, and of course, a high compliance mechanism. So now, right now, let's look at the ASEAN small and medium enterprises now. They still operate on thin margins. I mean, so introducing CBAM in this time before they have access to affordable alternative is really an economic stroke. It's really a punishment for them, not a motivation to innovate. Therefore, it risks eroding competitiveness of our regions and discouraging investment and push production elsewhere to non-ASEAN countries, I mean. So how about the claim that ASEAN can harmonize carbon accounting for a regional CBAM? It sounds good too, but it's only true in theory. Let's look at the practice. It failed because ASEAN lacks the essential institutional foundations. I mean, the foundation is not yet built. CBAM needs what? To be more simplified. We cannot tax what we cannot exactly measure. CBAM needs carbon measure and report, border enforcement, and unified carbon pricing, of course, strong compliance mechanisms. So how about ASEAN? ASEAN structure is consensus-based and non-binding, and I think it's not suitable for establishment of the CBAM. So this debate ultimately hinges on one question: is ASEAN ready institutionally and economically for the introduction of CBAM in the regions? We argue no. That's why the first one, regarding the institutions, the foundation is not built yet. Currently, ASEAN has vastly different environmental governance capacities, and of course, uneven digital data infrastructures. That's our difficulties. So, introducing a CBAM in this context risks lead to many harms, such as inconsistent application, bureaucratic delays, or high compliance costs. This effect directly affect the industry operations. So how about economically? Let's look at on the ground reality. The first one, some ASEAN countries remain heavily reliant on carbon-intensive export. Electricity grids are outdated and also rely on coal and gas. Green financing is limited. So instead motivating the transition, this risks supply chain disruption and capital flight or relocation of the products to non-ASEAN countries. So our concerns are practical, immediate, and industry-oriented. So one more time, we do not reject climate ambition. We reject a premature CBAM in the context of the ASEAN right now. So our approach is clear that we focus on enhancing regional capacity and establishing domestic carbon pricing, and of course promoting a mutual recognition of carbon standards in the regions. I think, so why is better? Because if you just apply CBAM in the context of our region, we just gain more money, and maybe it can reinvest in your transition. But I think it's only true if your CBAM really exists, but the foundation for the existence is not, as I have proved. So why is better? We need a more long-term and stable approach for ASEAN. Our approach, I believe, that is more detailed to national context and easier to harmonize than carbon pricings, and of course avoid hurting trade and economy of the regions. And I would like to emphasize on another benefit is that it's protect our economic competitiveness. Because if you apply CBAM, we just make ASEAN become a more expensive region. No. So at the end of the day, this debate comes down to the feasibilities, not the aspirations. So, and for those reasons, I'm proud to stand on the side of opposition team. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the speech. Now I reverse the speaking order. And with that, I invite Op Reply, Rivaldo, here.
As this debate comes to an end, it's almost time to hug and make up because we're all part of ASEAN anyway. But before that, I want to be petty and give you 4 reasons why government is losing this debate. The first reason they're losing this debate is on mutual exclusivity. What I mean by that is that the benefits that side government tries to claim are not exclusive to their side because we can also get them on our side. They say that CBAM is the gateway that opens up the way to many other climate policies. This is simply not true. Other climate policies can be done on our side, and from Jason at LO, we explained why we will do climate policies better on our side. In fact, we even explained why we would do other climate policies, like the regional carbon tax that they want, or the local carbon taxes, the one that Malaysia is already doing, the one that Singapore is already doing. Those policies are stronger on our side because we are not using resources that are now used on CBAM and taking them away from our policies, etc. We are also not losing the main sources of cheap materials for climate adaptation, such as cheap cement, cheap steel, that we need to make bigger seawalls to make climate-resilient architecture, because it is on their side that CBAM makes it much more expensive. So even in the best case of side government, where they maximize climate mitigation to a certain extent, when they conceded that climate adaptation is more important and that we need to protect vulnerable people, that's what loses them the debate, because we need materials to build the infrastructure to keep people safe. The second reason why government loses this debate is on the counter policy. So I want to deal with their accusation that we don't have a counter policy. Again, Jason immediately gave the counter policy, which was that we should allow each state to plan their own local legislation and do it at the pace that is in line with their economic development, is in line with their long-term capabilities. Because that's the only way you get sustainable growth. On their side, the whole region commits to CBAM. And without a central bank to bail it out, without a Eurozone or equivalent to the Eurozone, with shared monetary policy so that we can unify our economic direction, it's not like you can move back from that, right? This is an irreversible harm that you do to these countries. The third reason why they lose this debate is on weighing. Because even in the best case in which we concede the benefits to side government, we already did very clear weighing. This is not a debate about them having all the climate benefits and us having all the development benefits, right? We told you why. We have so many other climate policies that will at least mitigate the margin of how much additional emissions reduction that they have. So you have to weigh this small additional emissions reduction that they would have with a more radical policy against the enormous development harms that they never responded to. I told you about how we are still developing countries and how these are the industries, these are the materials that we get for cheap that form the industries that develop these nations. They said that we can still develop sustainably and we can manufacture up to the standards of the EU. But how do you do that when you can't build factories with steel and cement? Ultimately, they don't get to their long-term benefits. So, in terms of weighing, we're winning this because we prove to you how in the long term, you need to allow us to have these cheap materials, to have more resilient architecture, and to develop the industries for development. But secondly, the principal reason, there's also no response from side government to how we are not principally as obliged as the EU or other developed countries to take as drastic a policy as this. There is no peer in the world that does a CBAM, and to say that principally this is us doing our part is a major overstatement for a bunch of countries that are just trying to develop. The last thing that I want to explain that makes them lose this debate is the disconnect between Gov's impacts and their mechanizations. There's a certain sleight of hand that happens in a lot of the Gov arguments. They say we don't have to do it exactly like the EU, and therefore that solves all of the issues, when in reality they needed to explain exactly how we'll do it differently from the EU, from Prime Minister. Secondly, they needed to explain, if we want to decarbonize as a country, why do we need a CBAM that makes it that imports are suddenly given carbon border adjustment? Why not just make our producers decarbonize and our manufacturing companies decarbonize? You do that with our policy, you do that with carbon taxes, and that's why we win.
Thank you so much, Op Reply. Now I invite the last speaker of the debate, Gov Reply. Hezron, here.
Hi. Hello? Everyone, hello. Hi. 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 When I say hi, you say hello. Hi. Hello. Yeah, I just want to have fun. It's a showcase. Okay, so I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I want all of us to pray for the thousands of individuals that are dying in Sumatra and Indonesia. Those are the people who are the real proofs of people that are being impacted by the lack of policies that are done by ASEAN. I know, judges, that everything that negative team said was so convincing. We are not ready. We are not yet there. But the fact is, we need to be ready, because all the people that are suffering endlessly, we are losing the lives that are just so worthy to be protected. This is the reality that negative team tried to sway on from this debate. I will talk about 4 things in my reply speech, and probably will not win us the debate, but at least I can walk out from this stage being proud of myself and my team. So the first thing is that they tried to gaslight us on the idea of the principle of this debate. They say that we are not as principled as the EU. Judge, let me ask you a question. Just because I'm not obligated to do something, just because I am less obligated to do something than Aisha or Bila, it doesn't mean that I don't have an obligation. I believe that the important thing, the climate change, is something we are all obligated to, right? Noticing that we taught you from the very beginning that there are lives that are being lost out there. This means that ASEAN needs to take care of those people. And everything they taught us are things that are already existing in the status quo. They never taught us what are going to change from their policies, even if they want to do it intersectionally. But secondly, note to you that their counter-comparative is that, we're gonna let those countries do it by themselves. Sure, Singapore can do it by themselves. But as what their logic is, how about the other countries in ASEAN, right? Because if their premise is that there's one strong country and the rest are suffering, then how do we ensure that everyone will have an equal power for them to protect the people and the citizens from flood, from any natural disasters that can kill their life? What we're trying to prove to you in the 21 minutes of our speeches is simple panels. That CBAM is an extension of everything that they mentioned, right? We need to do this to save those people. This is something that we're doing, while in their side, it's unclear what is the different thing that they're gonna do. They need to do something. But the third thing that I'm going to talk about is, in the reply of negative, which I really appreciate, they talk about how all of our mechanisms in CBAM are not mutually exclusive with their arguments or like counter proposal. My question to that framing is simple. Why are all the things that negative mention cannot go hand in hand with CBAM? Because we told you that we do not have to make it 100% perfect as CBAM that are done by the EU, right? Which means that maybe now the tariff is 10 to 100 per ton of like those hydrogens or like any other stuff. But maybe in ASEAN, we are realistic. We're not going to apply the same amount of that, right? So maybe it's 5 to 50. Maybe it's 2 to 20 per ton. So these are the things that negative team try to analyze from us that they fail to do so. But the last thing is very simple. They try to say that this kind of policy will harm companies. But we told you from the very beginning that companies are not the girls that you need to worry about. Because companies, insofar that they are profit incentivized, they will always find a way to survive, just like us trying to take our last breath in this kind of flood, right? Which means that what matters right now is that you make a trickle-down incentive for those countries to regulate on their own domestic policies, to tell the companies to work on something so they can afford CBAM. This is why we told you from the very beginning of my speech in Prime Minister that we need to do this to incentivize the trickle-down effect from those countries to ensure that the companies can apply to the CBAM policy in the first place. CBAM might sound impossible, but impossible is something that we need to make possible whether or not we are willing or not, and that's why we're proud to propose.
Thank you so much, and that marks the end of the great sustainability debate. Debaters, you may now cross the floors and shake hands. On behalf of MIDP Youth Institute, are you guys okay? On behalf of MIDP Youth Institute, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the debaters and judges for taking part in this debate today. If you like us and the work that we do, please check out our website at midp.edu.my or our Instagram page at MIDP Youth. Let's get connected and make your big, bold ideas come true. My name is Qarirah Hasnizul, and it has been a pleasure chairing this debate. I now pass the floor back to the MC. Thank you.
A huge thank you to the brilliant debaters for their competitive spirit and